The other thing about this is not all disabilities are the same. Now, we know not all disabilities are the same, but that doesn't mean we have to then look at difference in terms of hierarchy. And this is the biggest mistake we made. That's the late John Callaghan did this lovely graphic. And I think the really important thing here is, there's a couple of quotes here, is that we have to watch the sort of slow slide, sometimes not so obvious, into ranking. We can't assume that the more severe disability, the more severe need. You know, so I think one thing about this is the whole kind of living of disability is very, very complex. I don't like the language catastrophic disability. It's very emotional. It not only is offensive, but it actually distorts the complex lived experiences of disability, and they are related to the fact that disability is often interpretive, it's adaptive, it's the context in which you live. Do you have support? Do you have family? The time in which you were born. All these kinds of things. So I'll just move on there. I was thinking about what are the things to make this work, and then I'm going to talk about those really briefly and then talk about the scheme. So I'm just playing with this new version of PowerPoint, by the way. We've had lots of PowerPoint discussions today. What's that? How many minutes is that? 8 minutes, that's good. So I thought the big enduring issue is anti-poverty. You know, we need to look at what are the strategies, you know, what are the strategies in place to ensure that disabled people stop having a subordinated position in society. And poverty, it clearly is the link. The extra costs of disability, report after report. For many of us who are activists, I get very frustrated about this. You know, the data's there, the proofs are there. Let's get on with it and have an anti-poverty strategy, and the support's there. We also need new imaginations and around the issue of education. We also need income, and that's recognising, in the form of employment, recognising that not all people with disabilities will take up job options. So I just wanted to kind of go through these. I've got 8 minutes, but I'll just run through these. I've got less than 8 minutes, have I? Okay, right, okay. I'll run through these. I was doing a grant submission yesterday, and I must say I found it really depressing. I had to stop and start. We know that disability makes us poor. We need more work on disability and debt. As against death. Okay, debt. The everyday expenses, goodness gracious, they have to be covered by this scheme. You know, they all have a system of the opportunity to file disability tax deductions. You know, the everyday expenses, electricity. We went to a session this morning about the spiralling cost of electricity, and to say nothing about the spiralling cost of drugs. We also know, and I'm very thankful about this, Australia's Health 2010, if you haven't read it, there's a really damning report that talks about disabled people being the most unhealthy of Australian citizens, not because of their impairment, but because of the socio-economic conditions. We know if you are in the lowest socio-economic group, the chances of you having a disability or disability effects are higher. Okay. Interestingly, we know that the last statistic here is in 2007 that people with severe activity limitations are more than 8 times likely to experience high or low levels of distress. I thought that was quite interesting. Okay, money, money, money and jobs. I think actually if it was any other group in the community, there'd be an absolute outcry. You know, Australia's workforce participation of disabled people, and John and I were talking about this earlier, we are at the lowest end of the scale, 13th out of 19 of OECD countries. You know, the Urella report talked about missing populations. You know, only 53% of disabled people are actually in the workforce, and it diminishes. How about this? Gross median income of $255 per week if you're a person with a disability compared to 501. I thought the last one was interesting. The personal income of disabled Australians is the lowest, being 44% of that of non-disabled persons. I'll keep moving through here. The other thing I just wanted to put up, guess what? I'm going to skip this slide, but it's really important. Education for disabled people in this country sucks. That's what I'm going to say. You know, 3.2% of disabled people ever get to university. This is outrageous. I cornered Bill Shorten one day and said, why don't we have a similar scheme for Indigenous Australians that encourage disabled people to go to universities? And, you know, that was many, many years ago. And interestingly, universities themselves are very ambivalent about whether they regard even disabled people as an equity group. And that's when you're students. When you're a staff member, forget it. Okay, I've got 2 more slides left. How are we going? 5 minutes. Thanks, Michael. You're the good news man. Okay, so some of the questions here. What's good? I wanted to be positive, John, because this is a great report. It's fantastic in terms of its initiative. Firstly, I think it's great that disability funding is seen as a responsibility of all Australians and as an essential plank of social protections. I am a bit of a federalist. Don't kill me. I think it's a great coming home. I think it's great to go back to a federal responsibility because it means it doesn't matter where you live in Australia, you can get the same access to services. But more importantly, I hope, and this is the thing I'd like to have taken on board, that there is integrated planning with employment planning for people with disabilities, with education planning. Without those 2 other prongs, we are reinventing that wheel, that cycle. I also would like to, I like the section under 4.27. I'm not sure why you guys did your page numbers like that. It was very confusing. But of the reasonable and necessary criteria, and I just wanted to just signal a bit of a danger here, even though it's under goods. There was a US judge, Judge Posner, some of you might know about him, but he was a philosopher, which makes it even worse. There were a number of cases there where he talked about the trivialisation of disability accommodations. Now, the problem about that is what is seen as trivial by many able-bodied people in terms of accommodations for disabled people ain't trivial to us. You know, it's a really big issue. So I think we need to look at what does this word reasonable actually mean and whose standpoint, where is it coming from? I think it's fantastic there's a consumer choice model. How is it to be enforced? What are the parameters? You know, where is the funding? Many of us have been arguing for years for leadership training. Where is the self-determination training that's put in place to make this happen? Or will we be blamed if we fall on our faces, so to speak, you know, if we stuff it up? Okay. I think it's great that funding is it will be exclusively reserved for disability support, and I said to John that terrible word, hypothecation. I like that. Do we need to have it entrenched? What if we get a nasty government in that comes in that decides they don't like disabled people? Well, more so than what we've had in the last few decades, maybe. But we need to know that it's not subject to the politics of economics. Individualised funding, Leslie raised that earlier. My goodness, I've dragged out my 1983 paper on a disability allowance. So, and I think it's if we're gutting a no-fault system then, we need to say then, if we're really on about no fault, well, why do we keep harping back to causation? Causation of disability, causation of impairment should be irrelevant. 2 minutes, John? Oh, Michael? 1? God. Okay, that's a New South Wales person for you. Okay, let's keep moving. What is a concern? I know, Michael, that's fine. So while we, you know, it looks inclusive, the target groups, but, you know, I do worry that the target groups are still partitioned in terms of silos. And I think we really need to look at the real scope. I talked about that earlier. In page 3.5, there is mention of, I thought this is interesting, NDIA taking up an educative advocacy arm. Very interesting. It also says existing resources, and I said, which ones? I want to know where they are, because guess what? There's not much money around for educative and advocacy. Particularly, we need a violently penetrating community education campaign so that people get over their issues about disability. Okay, so that's the challenge. I don't think the separate state insurance scheme proposal for the NDIS, I don't think it's well argued. It's based on what I believe are exaggerated differences between the 2 cohorts in particular. We need to focus on habilitation as well as rehabilitation, Article 26 of the Convention. I did have one of my tort law people have a look at this, and they also suggested with the NDIS, it often focuses on injuries predominantly experienced by men. Did you know, I learnt this myself, that the highest level of medical negligence claims are for cosmetic surgery? Makes you want to think twice, doesn't it? And they're experienced by women, and that's often left to the foibles of the common law system. Last slide. Half a minute. Goodness gracious, sorry. So I've got some questions here, and I'm processing this through. 3 volumes is hard to read. Is the corporation model the best? This is the governance question. How do we have skilled monitoring, management and planning, and without reducing people with disabilities' participation to an advisory role? Now, if we want to get involved in the corporate models, how do we train up us to be corporatised? I don't know if that's a word, but anyway, it'll do. Can the proposed governance model really get disability? And I think that's the issue. Like, the corporate experience is very, very important, but you also need to kind of know about the complexities. And I use the example of superannuation boards. They act instrumentally on market issues, I hope. But they're not necessarily that good at change of life, social policy concerns. So how do we bring these groups together? Might a market-based model be in collision with social protection agendas, which are unprofitable? Check for this. There are going to be groups of people with disabilities are unprofitable, to use that terrible language. Should the convention approach be privileged? And I think that's Leslie. That was really strong in Leslie's talk. I think it should be the guiding conceptual approach rather than the ICF. If you're going to use the corporation governance model, I look forward to train us up to be good to sitting on these corporate boards and learning to read stats and graphs, which is my steep learning curve at the moment. Corporation expertise already lags behind in the areas of gender equity. So how can we assure nothing about us without us? Without being reduced to some advisory capacity. So my concern about this kind of stuff, and I guess maybe you'd end up becoming a bit of a cynic in your old age in this area, is we've got to get the governance right to ensure that we don't have another layer of power that's in the hands of people other than people with disabilities themselves. And I think that's really important. But we also need to train people with disabilities themselves to exercise power. Thank you very much.